Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. I have a special guest, a friend, someone I've known for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah.
Nathan? Welcome to Off the Podium.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Where did you just come from? You had a long drive.
So I left my house in Puyallup this morning at 7 a.m. to do 10:30 solo ensemble adjudication in Aberdeen, which I was shocked at first because they're supposed to be in the same region as the Olympia schools. And the teacher at this school met me when I was adjudicating for the Olympia area schools last year, and she decided this year to just not compete with the Olympia area kids.
I see.
Because they all take private lessons because there's a lot of money in that area, and she figured my kids are so afraid of them, and I always, as an adjudicator, specifically in a solo ensemble situation with like middle school, junior high age, she had some high schoolers, but not too many. That your number one priority is how do I keep this kid playing music?
Yeah.
How do I get them to continue? And by showing up, in Olympia with these kids who've been taking private lessons since they're 5, that's not exactly the best way to encourage them to continue playing.
Yeah.
So it was a similar experience. Some people who were really doing their best, and some people who were maybe having their first performance ever.
Man, that's always tough.
Yeah, you have to find a way to say something more than just thanks for playing.
Yeah.
That's also encouraging. So I usually pull mostly on my humor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the kids with the wrist. I mean, the podcast is audio only. Really sucks right now. With the broken wrist, where it's like they have a silver platter on their hand.
Yeah.
I call it the pizza hand. And I would tell my first year students, because I've been teaching public school the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Don't serve me imaginary pizzas. Because I cannot eat them. It makes me sad when you give me the idea that I'm going to be able to eat a pizza and there's no pizza. And when I was growing up, it was like, don't squash the mouse, that's the mouse house. Or I imagine there's a little hamster. And think my wife's orchestra teacher, Paula Westgard, she's like a wizard of an orchestra teacher. She said, Hammy the hamster. Don't squish Hammy the hamster.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's funny enough for kids in an age where people are letting their 11-year-old kids play Call of Duty. Squishing a hamster is not exactly gory enough to prevent them from breaking. So I say, don't serve me pizzas. I can't eat. You bring
I was going to say, in the middle of you talking, I just realized I completely messed up.
Uh-huh.
Because we initially decided, and you're interested in doing a podcast, and we initially decided that we're going to do this as a
dual cast.
That's right. So
we should introduce the other half of this podcast.
That's right.
Yeah, so I have my own podcast, Drunk Music History, much like the television show Drunk History, except only music history, because music history is such a rich and vibrant area of study. But is just really tedious.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to get a group of people sitting down to talk about 18th century musical aesthetics. So why not introduce some lubrication to the situation by maybe having a few drinks while we talk about music.
We are having some drinks right now.
Oh, yes, we are. We're only on number 1 right now, so by the end of this could be a totally different topic altogether. But my thought is to just talk about music history at large with a variety of people and really deal more with topics than individual composers because there's only so many.
Yeah.
But
what are some topics that you're thinking of?
The first idea that came to my mind was talking about closeted composers because so many of our favorite composers were either suspected of being homosexual or in the case of Tchaikovsky, really were, and most scholars really believe he took his own life because of that struggle with homosexuality in Russia, which
So Tchaikovsky, if we're thinking about this particular topic, might be one of the earlier ones that we know. I mean, although we don't know many of the other composers' lives, but he's the first one that comes to mind if we're thinking
let's not stick to men. I mean, Hildegard von Bingen. I mean, why do you become a nun?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, who knows that? I haven't read all the articles on her, but
so some other names.
Well, Benjamin Britten was the first out, and even him only really partially out until people like Bernstein stuck up for him and said, "Why does it matter? His music is beautiful."
Yeah. And Bernstein is...
Yeah, and Bernstein himself, I mean, he was... I am totally cool with anybody and their sexual orientation as long as they are open about it and treat people with respect. Yeah. And also the whole issue of consent.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've heard the stories of Bernstein. He'd show up in some Miami, concert hall.
Yeah.
And would take these little stagehands out on tours and give them lots of extra jobs to do. And gee, Mr. Bernstein, how can I thank you? Well, I'll tell you how. I mean,
but these are stories. We want to be clear on the podcast.
Yeah.
That these are not factual evidence.
These
are just stories.
Hearsay. Yeah.
Yes. And also, since we're on that sort of topic, recent allegations. You have some thoughts on those?
Well, I think first and foremost, before we move on to anything else, or any specific cases, I always tell my students, think of Harry Potter, Dumbledore. Dumbledore, book 7, is like every hero that you've ever had in your life. You build them up as this symbol of perfection and morality. But turns out they have some crooked stuff here and there. But does that make them any less great? Well, the allegations against Martin Luther King that he was a little bit of a philanderer. Does that make his greatness any less? That he was, sleeping with other women that weren't his wife?
Yeah.
Does that make the civil rights movement moot?
Yeah.
No, of course not. Yeah. I mean, we're all flawed, including our heroes.
Yeah. And that's always good to keep in mind. One thing I realized, and I have actually told this to my wife, I have some heroes, musical heroes, that are still alive, not the dead ones. and the one thing I'm always afraid with my musical heroes who are alive, meeting them. I'm afraid to meet them. Because I'm afraid that I will meet them and be disappointed.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you did your doctorate with Merlot, of course.
That's right.
And I, about 3 years ago, because of my friendship with the Seattle Symphony pianist Kimberly Russ, I started turning pages for pianists with the Seattle Symphony. And my first ever gig, I was turning pages for Alexei Lubimov. And it was a concert of only Soviet minimalist music, which was the most terrifying and awful musical experience of my entire... It was so interesting. On an intellectual level, was feeding me a lot and was very musically fulfilling. But, he was so cold and... Well, he lived in the Soviet Union for so long. And, when I learned more about his story, about how he snuck to Germany somehow and got to America and got a record of Riley's In C. And smuggled it into Russia. And that's how the first piece that they played on the program, Récit de Voyage by Rabinovich Barkovsky is the guy's name. Totally forgotten composer. I forget what exactly happened to him, but I don't think the Soviet Union was super happy with the music he was writing.
Yeah.
And turning pages for him, he was so... It was beyond frank. It was cold.
Yeah.
I've gone off on a complete tangent, but back to we were talking about heroes.
Oh, go for it. I love the tangents. Go for it.
I was turning pages for Alexei Lubimov, and I was very nervous because he was sort of Soviet and gruff, and most of the performers were people from the symphony that themselves are Russian immigrants.
Yeah.
And I did not disclose that I speak about a 3rd grade level of Russian, and was very aware when they were saying things about who the heck is that white guy that is with the beard that is turning pages? He doesn't play with the symphony. He doesn't look like one of the UW piano students. What is he doing here? And I pretended to not hear them. But Ludovic showed up, and I saw him. I instantly wanted to introduce myself And it's like, oh, I want to be a conductor, and I'm doing this, that, and I know these people that you know, and I found myself in like that moment. If like you met Oprah, you'd just be like, I couldn't say anything. He just sort of looked at me and said, "Hi." I couldn't form words to greet him with. Yeah, and of course, subsequent page turnings after that actually was forced into conversation with him, and it got a little more normal. I ended up turning pages for the 2 piano versions of the Rite of Spring.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for what was that guy's name? French Canadian.
Marc-André Hamelin.
Yeah, Hamelin.
Yeah. I know his work well. I love what he does.
And also a fellow Norski of mine, Leif Ova Onsnes, I think is his last name. Yeah, and equally fantastic composer. What I didn't expect to be on the program, because they only really tell me what the big thing is, and I suppose if I really read my emails clearly, I would see the other pieces on the program. But the Debussy Black and White, the Blanc et Noir.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was some of the hardest page turning I have ever done. Which, I mean, as a conductor, is fantastic training for me, being able to follow the score, and has helped me in situations where I've had to cover for conductors and know what's coming next.
Yeah.
But that piece, I don't know how they followed it. I mean, they must have just had it memorized, and me turning the pages was just some sort of ceremony that we just do now.
Yeah.
And in the middle of it is the Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, which myself, being raised Lutheran and going to Pacific Lutheran University, was a big, oh, I didn't know that was there. But in the context of the Blanc et Noir, is supposed to be a symbol of the German oppression during the war. Whereas I see it as more of a rising up of the Protestant peoples against the Catholic Church, who wanted to withhold information about religion from all people who didn't speak Latin, who didn't have the money to go to school and learn how to speak Latin. So I have the perspective that is one of the first pieces. Again, I've been to Wittenberg and seen the Luther's little tiny hymnal. I mean, it's literally this big, yay big. I mean, about the same size as a...
Before you continue, I'm going to say that next time we do this, we really have to put it on video, because your gestures, your body language, your body language is just amazing.
Absolutely
I wish it was all recorded.
So his little tiny hymnal, it's about the size of the original iPhone, but if it like opened as a book, that's how big it was. Because his thinking was, for a millennia, I mean, since the dawn of Christendom, you would show up at church and there would be a professional choir that sang, and you would have no idea what was going on. I mean, none. Because you're from Neustadt am der Donau, and you speak, Low German. You have no idea what's happening. And so he said, let's hand this out to the people, and let's make the music simple enough that they can sing along, and make a harmonization that is, sufficient enough for a professional organist. Yeah. Which is, of course, how Bach made a living. I mean, if we didn't have the Reformation, we wouldn't have Bach. We wouldn't have anything.
Going back a little bit to your page turning.
Yes, please. Let's
Soviet
have a linear thought line for once.
Well, that reminded me, because there's all these Armenian composers,
totally suppressed by the Soviet Union.
Yes, and not only that, some of them like Khachaturian and Babajanian and Alexander Arutyunian. Alexander Arutyunian were the trumpet concerto.
Yeah, the trumpet. I know the trumpet concerto.
Well, sometimes from music critics, musicologists, music historians, even musicians, like, well, that piece is just a showy piece, and that's what it is. I mean, he didn't do anything substantial, and that's
ignore the whole what's the word? Well, the word is gone. The rest of his work, which is equally amazing.
Yeah, but also the thing about some of these composers is that they had families. We always forget that, living in a country that is so. It's like a dictatorship, and living in a country like that where you're afraid to do something that the state might not like, and always having this fear for your family, for your job, and all these things, I'm sure they would have been more adventurous in how they composed. And I'm sure they would be more adventurous if they had more access to what was going on in the West as far as music in the 20th century. But they didn't have the access. They didn't have the freedom to do whatever they wanted. So they had to do whatever they can within this box. And so that made them compose in that style, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to do it. That doesn't take away from how great they are, you know. And to be honest, with all those composers, Babajanian, Arakelyan, and Khachaturian, and many of the other Armenian composers and non-Armenian composers, because there were Georgians and Ukrainians and all these different parts of the Soviet Union, states of the Soviet Union, had amazing composers who were just
not to mention former Yugoslavia.
That's right, and they were put in such a small box to compose within those boundaries. So they were only limited. And when I think about all those boundaries, I'm just amazed that they even had the energy to work within those conditions. So I even have more respect for them for doing that.
One of my first ever conducting lessons with Dr. Paul Cobbs, we were at the time working on Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony in Tacoma Youth Symphony. And he told me a story about his sort of fall from grace after writing the Lady of Macbeth, and that he wrote the Fourth Symphony, had one rehearsal, and destroyed the parts.
Yeah.
And they've since restored the parts from a score that they found in somebody's attic that was smart enough to keep it.
Yeah.
And so listening to the Fourth Symphony, Shostakovich's Fourth Symphony, forever changed my perspective on the reality of music in Soviet-controlled regions, and the raw brutality that is present in the Fourth Symphony, as opposed to the Fifth Symphony, which is pretty much all fluff. It's sort of the Soviet Russia's greatest hits. I mean, and of course within the context of the Fifth Symphony, he still maintains his own personality and makes a couple jabs at the Soviet Union itself. I've actually done a little bit of research into the motifs of Shostakovich at large, and the sort of long, short, on repeat, dun, jigga, dun, jigga, dun, jigga, dun, is, in my opinion, and I have very little research to support this, but in my opinion, the representation of Soviet oppression. So you get the Viennese cafe thing in the second movement of Shostakovich 5, but in every piece, when something evil is happening, somebody is going jum 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 jum, or that's always present, and I think that's a motif, almost like Beethoven 5. I mean, the simplest enough musical material that even musicologists and critics looked right past it and didn't see it.
Yeah, the great thing about Shostakovich and some of the Soviet composers in general, I mean, Khachaturian wrote a couple of symphonies, and he also wrote ballet and all these other things. And the same thing with Shostakovich. He wrote symphonies, string quartets. He wrote for film. He did the jazz suites, which are absolutely fabulous. Yes. And so he was just so he was able to.
Well, the jazz suite's absolutely wasted on car commercials usually.
Yeah. And it's so beautiful music and all different kinds of genres.
And his operas.
Operas, amazing, yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the orchestralexcerpts.com. There's this guy, he's a violinist somewhere down in St. Louis, I want to say. Brian Gilpin? I forget how to pronounce his last name. But it started out as just for violin, and then it expanded to all instruments. And he keeps a running list of orchestral excerpts for all different instruments, and the list of excerpts that are being asked for from all the professional orchestras, at least in the States. And in the violin excerpts, there are several excerpts from Shostakovich's operas. I mean, of course, there's the little bits from Shostakovich 5, like the concertmaster solo and the bit in the first movement where that everybody plays out of tune every time that's played. Yeah. But there's 5 from his operas, 2 from The Nose, 2 from Lady Macbeth, and another from a third operatic or stage work that I forget. And it's just so terrifying that I don't think I've ever even played it. But to see that is still in the repertoire in the subtlest of ways is encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that music is just ridiculous, and I understand why people don't play it.
Yeah. Let's jump to what you're doing now, what you're trying to do with your career. Interested in pursuing a graduate degree in conducting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have always had my sights on conducting ever since I was about 15, 16. I knew that just playing one instrument was just not enough music for me. Mm-hmm. And I'd go home on Friday night from high school, and IMSLP was a new thing when I was in high school, and I would just download all 7 Sibelius symphonies. Well, I think maybe only 4 were available at the time. I download whatever I could get my hands on and just stare at it and imagine myself conducting and sort of how I would do it differently. And I've always been an opinionated person. And so listening to, people like Bernard Haitink and Carry On, and it's like, oh, they're wrong. No, I'll do it my way. And then, of course, I went to college and learned, oh, no, you're wrong too. Which I think is what the purpose of college is to find out what you don't know.
Yeah, because sometimes.
Yeah. You have all this ambition as a young person who wants to go on to college or go into graduate school because you think you know so much about a specific area, and then you get there and you find out how much you don't know.
Yeah.
So anyhow, my goal was always to go where I could get some kind of assistantship.
Yeah.
Originally, when I was in high school, I wanted to go into composition because I'd written a fair amount of music, some of which has been performed and most of which just needs so much revision, I might as well just throw it away. And I got into Rice and Northwestern for composition, and I had some lessons with Ken Goldsmith down at Rice, and I had some lessons with a number of different teachers at Northwestern. And I instantly realized that there are 20 other people that are exactly like me, and there's 3 people who are just so much better than me, I'm never going to get any attention from these teachers. And in junior high, I started taking lessons with Sven Ronning, who is the concertmaster of Symphony Tacoma and the professor of violin and the head of string studies at PLU. And he, in retrospect, very selfishly said, you should go where you're going to get the best education. And I thought to myself, where am I going to get the most attention? Yeah. If I go to Northwestern, if I do my very best, I'll be like 3rd chair. And I would break my back and not go to any of my general requirement classes to practice all day. Yeah. But at PLU, I got to be concertmaster pretty much constantly. My sophomore year, I convinced the conductor to do the Stravinsky Pulcinella Suite, which is a beautiful piece of music that just nobody knows about. Yeah. Most of that music is actually not by the people that they think it's by. They say a lot of it's by Pergolesi, but that's neither here nor there. Where was I going with that story?
I don't know.
Me neither.
No. The initial question was your graduate study.
Yes, thank you. Of course. And then while I was at PLU, I had opportunities to work with, of course, the orchestra with Jeff Bell Hansen. I got to conduct the Hindemith Symphonic Metamorphoses.
Wow.
And then we have a chamber orchestra at PLU. That's the orchestra that goes on tour, or regardless of whether or not there's a tour, they do a separate concert in the spring that's separate from the large symphony orchestra. And I got to conduct a couple of those things, and so I got to conduct when we went on tour in Europe and then on tour in California later on while I was at PLU. But the professor that does the conducting studies at PLU, Ed Powell, who is a close friend of mine and just an all-around great guy, he told me one day during one of my last conducting classes, so we need another bass player in the wind ensemble, and you're taking string lab right now, so you're going to play bass and wind ensemble as your part of your conducting grade.
Well, bass in the wind ensemble, what did you play?
Bass!
What kind of music did you play?
No, we were doing the Schwantner from A Dark Millennium.
Oh, wow.
And then we did this new piece by a composer whose name was, I think, Cosmos. Get the lady's name. Oh my goodness. It'll come to me at some point. But just the most ridiculous, obscure, I mean, like 11/8, 13/8, 16/8.
With a lot of percussion.
Yes, and I mean, like weird percussion stuff. Yeah. Just, and the bass is barely audible anyway.
So you could have just played whatever.
Yeah. It was sort of, in return, I got a little more from him because I was sort of, well, I wasn't really doing him a favor if he was requiring me to do it. But it earned me some brownie points, let's just say that. And of course, I'm also a singer, and so I got to work with the PLU's Choir of the West, which at the year of my graduation was ranked 4th best for college choirs in the whole world. I
mean, I'm sure it's a great choir. But, I mean, when those rankings come out, like, I graduated from University of Washington.
As did Jeffrey Bors, who was in charge of choir at UW. He graduated from PLU, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and you know, some of these rankings, how do they work? I mean, who comes up with these rankings? What do they base it on? There's so many choirs. There's like 600 undergraduate programs in the U.S.
Well, they only rank people who are participating in certain competitions which are sort of mutually collaborative. So the year that we were ranked, we were invited to the International Anton Bruckner Choral Festival in Linz, Austria.
Wow.
We were the first American choir ever invited.
Wow.
And this is just irony, but the day of the concert was D-Day.
Wow. Wow.
And we won in every category.
Wow.
It was hilarious.
Speaking of Anton Bruckner...
What do I think of Anton Bruckner?
I mean, just a forgotten sort of composer.
Well, he said so little in so long a period of time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's at once the same mind that it takes to appreciate something like early, like Renaissance music, like Hildegard von Bingen or Joachim d'Après, and someone who appreciates something like Mahler.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of the full extent of the orchestral medium, but with sort of musical language that is much more simple. I mean, his orchestration, the strings are just tremoloing for an hour and a half, which is the most frustrating part about playing Bruckner, if you're not conducting it. And the brass just have everything that they've ever wanted and never got out of Mozart, Beethoven, and Brahms.
Yeah.
Because, of course, during the time of Mozart, the brass were still not exactly welcome in the concert hall or the church, which the church often was their concert hall.
Yeah.
Which is why brass players love Bruckner so much. And he used those stinking Wagner horns, which are really just euphoniums.
You know who loved Bruckner, though?
Who loved Bruckner?
A couple of conductors that I really enjoy for different reasons.
Yes.
Sergiu Celibidache.
Well, you know the allegations about him. We started with allegations.
Yeah.
That whole thing with him and the principal trombone player with the Munich the Symphony of Munich.
I'll be honest, I don't know anything about this.
Really?
Go for it.
So the first time ever they do blind auditions.
Mm-hmm. What is it, 70s or what? 60s?
I think 80s, actually. Okay. But I could be totally wrong after the beer and the cognac. Probably not.
By the way, before you get to that story, how's the Armenian cognac?
The Armenian cognac beats every other kind of cognac I've ever had in my life.
You're too drunk to judge, though.
No. I'm Norwegian. I'm not even drunk yet. Is it Celibidache? Because I've always heard it's Celibidache. He's Romanian, so who knows?
Yeah, I say Celibidache, but might be wrong too, so I don't know.
So this guy that we referred to with different pronunciations, whose first name is Sergiu, which we can agree on. They did blind auditions for, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe, for one of the first times in Munich. And they unanimously agree on this person who turns out to be a woman. And Celibidache instantly just has it out for her.
Wow.
She's not playing any concerts that I'm conducting. So she only would play when there were concerts where he was gone and they had a guest conductor.
Or an assistant conductor.
Yeah, or an assistant conductor. And that sort of behavior went on for some time, and then he found some kind of excuse to like basically fire her, more or less, or make her unusable in the orchestra. And she, for I think it was as many as 15 years, as few as 5, in the legal system, fought to be repaid for all the years that she lost and all the concerts that she was not playing that she should have been playing on. And she had to do things like go to a doctor and do the breath test where they test your lung capacity. I mean, every doctor said.
I mean that's kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
No,
mostly because I mean, if you've done a blind audition, you've passed. If you.
But once he saw it was a woman, he assumed she cannot possibly be as good as any man.
What's the point of a test at that point? If you've
because you're a misogynist. That's why.
That's ridiculous. Because if you've passed a blind audition, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. That's stupidity. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the racism makes no sense either, but people are still doing it.
Yeah. That's a crazy story which I didn't know about. Is that woman still around?
She sure is, and she is fantastic.
And I hope to get her name from you.
I will.
You don't have to do it now.
I'll look it up right now. That's why we have these crazy phones.
I would love to have her on my podcast to talk about all those things. That's a fascinating story which I didn't know about. But we'll take another break and we'll come back and talk more.
Yeah, we were talking about the trombone player with Celibidache.
Yeah.
So they did a blind audition. Abbie Conant, I'm probably not pronouncing her name right. She went through all these. It was something like 10 years of litigation hearings against the Munich Philharmonic and Celibidache, trying to prove that she was, at least a capable trombone player. They had her do like all these breath tests and lung capacity and all this stuff. And American conductors who had come to guest conduct the Munich Philharmonic had all written her reviews of she's a superior trombone player in every way. He still insisted that because she was a woman, somehow she wouldn't be able to produce enough tone like a man would. Which just blows my mind, because everything else he says, I really...
He has good philosophy on music, and that's, I listen to a lot of his lectures and master classes that he has online. You could find YouTube videos of. They're great. Celibidache, completely different style of Bruckner conducting. That's how we started.
Well, and his whole principle, I think this is in reference to the Dvorak symphonies, but he talks about how your tempo must be different depending on the space that you're in.
Yeah.
Because of the resonance of the hall.
Which is great, which is true.
And going to PLU, we play the Lagerquist Concert Hall, even with the curtains all the way down, is really intended for organ and choir.
Yeah.
And so it's one of my primary mentors, Jeff Bell Hansen, has spent, most of his career at PLU teaching people that what looks like an eighth note is really a staccato 32nd note. What you articulate on the instrument and what it sounds like out in the hall are not the same thing.
Well, the reason why we talked about this...
Celibidache?
Yeah, or Celibidache, whatever you want to say. But is because we were talking about Bruckner and the symphonies and how he conducts a lot of Bruckner and he really likes Bruckner, but also Stanislav Skravachevsky, which many people don't know about.
I have never heard of him.
He was the conductor of Minnesota Symphony, Minnesota Orchestra.
The Minnesota Orchestra, yeah.
And for many years, and amazing conductor. And when I heard his recordings and his tempo is very different from what Celibidache does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, very different and exciting, and I really loved it. And I was at the Pierre Monteau School in Maine for 6 weeks, and I was assigned to conduct a movement from a Bruckner symphony.
Which one?
Bruckner 6. Bruckner 6.
6 is the one I like the best, but 7 is the one that everybody does.
And it was Bruckner 6 first movement, I think, and then I ended up with Mahler Northwest Mahler Festival. He won the reading sessions. They contacted me, and I did Bruckner 6, the whole thing.
Yes.
Won the reading sessions. But anyways, that's when I was in Maine just searching for some recordings, and I came across Stanislav Skravachevsky. And it was an absolute amazing recording, and I really loved what he was doing with the time. I was thinking about all these different things, and it seemed like he was actually doing all these different things that I connected to so well. And a conductor that not many people know, and I think people should know about him. He just recently passed away.
Well, in the same way that like Esa-Pekka Salonen, I think in many ways is a superior conductor to Dudamel, because I feel his performance is much more authentic and based on the what you are hearing and not what you are seeing. And Dudamel, as much as he is a musical genius and is very much a capable conductor, I mean, no one is disagreeing about that. But
some people are.
I won't go there. But as far as an informed performance of a piece, I feel like Esa-Pekka Salonen did a much better job.
Well, Esa-Pekka Salonen is also a composer. So he has that perspective. It's like,
and he's not a conductor for the audience. He's a conductor for the orchestra.
Yeah.
And
he did a lot of great things. The reason why LA Phil recently there was an article about how LA Phil is doing such diverse programming.
The preparation that Esa-Pekka set up.
Yeah, I mean he was there for 19 years or so, or maybe close to. Maybe I'm mistaken, but he was there for a while.
Well, he's Finnish, so he doesn't age.
Yeah, so you know how to relate to that.
Yes.
But he was, he did all these wonderful things, and that's why LA Phil is such a leading orchestra, especially when it comes to diversity and programming and all the outreach stuff that they do, all the youth orchestra stuff that they do. I'm really proud, and I mean, for those who don't know, I grew up in LA, so I'm very proud that LA has such a great orchestra, and Dudamel continues.
They continue to do well. And the new post about what they're doing with the 100th season. I mean, he's continuing to take it further and further and further. Yeah. And when you understand that the Dudamel comes from, El Sistema and working with the Simon Bolivar Orchestra, I mean, being, and in a very encouraging way, ridiculous with your gesture. Yeah. If you've watched those videos of him at the BBC Proms with the Simon Bolivar Orchestra, I mean, that's what
was that Shostakovich 10? Was that the one?
Well, and they also do the Marquez Danza number 2, and they did a couple. I think they did Mahler 2 at the BBC Prop. That was a different year.
Okay.
But that's the kind of gesture that a youth orchestra responds to.
Yeah.
That he provides the same kind of energy with which the music is meant to be played. Yeah. And that's not necessarily something that Esa-Pekka Salonen provided to the orchestra.
Sure.
But what I admire about him is that he is clear and authentic with his passion. I was just watching I got a pass to the Berlin Phil digital concert hall. The Kirill Petrenko. I don't know if you've watched him yet.
Petrenko, of course, yeah.
I mean, ignore his arms and his hands completely. His face,
amazing,
is the most authentic that I've ever seen a conductor give. His performance of the Scriabin, the Poem of Ecstasy.
Yes.
Oh my God! I mean, he's doing ridiculous things with. Throwing his hands out of both sides and clutching his fists in front of his face. But if you look in his eyes and you see his face, it's almost like some of those old comedians who used to work with orchestras back in like the 50s and 60s. They would, just do silly things with orchestras, like conduct with their tongue or kick a foot out. The gesture is impulse, wherever it comes from. And I think the authenticity in gesture is the most important element of conducting, which is what he captures. And they seem to be doing a lot of concerts with him, and it seems like Simon Rattle is doing less and less and less.
Well, he's on his way out, so yeah.
They must. For a while it looked like they were maybe looking at Simon Bichkov, but he's also old and not doing much. Although his performance of the Walton Symphony, which I think is one of the greatest underrated symphonies, the Walton First Symphony, that's fantastic. His performance of that with the Berlin Phil. If you haven't seen that, you got to check it out.
I haven't seen it.
It's amazing.
Audiences in classical music. This is one question that bothers me, and I always think about.
Do you serve the audience, or do you serve the orchestra, or the music? Is that the question?
No, that's not the. That could be the question, but my point is that I go to these concerts in Seattle. A lot of amazing concerts and very talented musicians, great programming. Mm-hmm. But one thing I see is not enough audience in the halls. What are we doing wrong? Are we doing something wrong?
This is a disagreement I had with my mentor at PLU, Jeff Bell Hansen. is he always wanted to be championing the music of modern composers. And no matter what music you program, you have to put a program together that an audience wants to hear.
True.
That doesn't mean that we have to do only pops concerts.
Let me tell you this. Recently I had an audition. I won't say which orchestra, but I recently had an audition. You might know. But they asked me a couple of questions, and they asked me about programming. And the thing about programming is that I pick something that will challenge the orchestra, especially when it's a youth orchestra. I pick something that will challenge them, but I also want to pick something that will excite the audience. That's the thing. It's really tough to program something, but you have.
Well, your first thought, first and foremost, must be who is the orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
If this is a youth orchestra or an amateur orchestra, have they taken the pedagogic steps to play all repertoire available to the audience before you think about the audience?
That's true, but there's a difference between a community orchestra, for example, amateur orchestra, and a youth orchestra. The difference is that the youth orchestra is constantly changing. You constantly get new players, where in the community orchestra, you get players who might stay there for 10, 15 years. That you won't get that with the youth orchestra.
Probably 40 years and never make any improvements. Unfortunately.
That's tough. And, I love working with community orchestras because, they do it because they...
It has a similar feeling as the youth orchestra. That
in some ways, yeah.
You're trying to assist them in their symphonic growth.
True.
Somehow.
Yeah.
In whatever way you are able to.
Well, tell me this. Are we doing, as professional musicians, are we doing anything wrong? Why are audiences not more active? Why don't more audiences come out to concerts?
Absolutely.
What are we doing wrong?
What we are doing wrong is serving music that does not serve the community. And the community refers to both the orchestra and the audience.
Okay.
Now, I'll go out on a limb, and there's a lot of people that get mad at me. There is no reason ever to do a Schumann symphony anymore. Ever.
What would you replace a Schumann symphony with? Answer that.
A Schumann symphony, any Tchaikovsky symphony. Any.
The audiences and the orchestra would
any
Tchaikovsky
Tchaikovsky symphony. Yeah. Because it both has emotion and excitement, and it has the same contrapuntal and harmonic things that intrigued musical scholars for years. And perhaps this is because I'm speaking from the perspective of a violinist. Schumann is very awkward to play, and its difficulty is reflected to what the audience hears, especially in a youth orchestra.
Yeah.
If you want a youth orchestra to play any of the Schumann symphonies, you're going to fight them.
Yeah.
In every rehearsal. And your primary goal as a conductor of a youth symphony is to make them enjoy music.
Of course. Yeah.
And if they play Schumann, they're not going to love music.
Yeah.
If they're going to play the Schumann quintet, they might love music.
Yeah.
If they're going to play a Schumann piano work, they might love Schumann.
Yeah.
But the Schumann symphonies are so poorly orchestrated.
Yeah.
Even Brahms, as much as I love Brahms, the first symphony is the only one I would ever do with the youth orchestra.
The first symphony, it took him like 20, 30 years to write.
Well, he was so afraid of the shadow of Beethoven. And if he was so afraid of the shadow of Beethoven, and he so respected the shadow of Beethoven, perhaps that's not such a bad place to start. And if, realistically, you have not played successfully a symphony by Beethoven, why would you move on to Schumann or Brahms? Mm. Why?
For all those youth orchestra conductor, music directors that are listening to this, working with amateur orchestras, community orchestras, youth orchestras, what's your suggestion on a Beethoven symphony to start with?
The best Beethoven symphony to start with, in my opinion, is Beethoven 5. But not the first movement. Is only do the fourth movement.
Wow, okay.
I feel that in between like 1997 up till now, we feel a debt to composers to play their works in completion. But if you look up the history of Mahler, who has some of the longest symphonies in existence, he didn't even premiere his symphonies at their full length. He premiered one Satz at a time, which, like in Mahler 5 would refer to like the fourth and fifth movement as one Satz, one set, or a tableau if you want to use the French nomenclature. And that's fine. I mean, you don't... a 16-year-old does not have the focus to devote to an hour and 45-minute symphony and also make room for the necessary things that a student needs to learn how to do, which in my opinion is they need to both play as a symphonic musician and come into an understanding of the symphonic repertoire, but also learn how to accompany a soloist, which is why my and many people's recipe for a concert is an overture of some form, or a
concerto. Overture.
Well, no, overture or some sort of symphonic piece, which is
like a tone poem,
like a less than 15 minutes, 15 minutes or less.
Okay.
Something introductory which excites the audience, and then a piece with a soloist, and that is the first half of your program. And then a larger work of some kind, usually a symphony. When I was in Tacoma Symphony with Dr. Cobbs, whom I think is one of the best programmers that there is, my first ever concert with the top youth orchestra in Tacoma Symphony, we did the Rimsky-Korsakov Russian Easter Overture.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Which is one of the best pieces to do with an advanced youth orchestra. Yeah. And it's a real show of what they're able to do. And each instrument group sort of gets their solo. In the same way that I think Capriccio Espagnol is a great piece for a summer orchestra, because every instrument literally gets a solo. There's a violin solo, there's a cello solo, there's a clarinet solo. The Offenbach, the overture to Orpheus in the Underworld, has a solo for almost every instrument, which is important in a youth orchestra. Everyone needs a chance to shine, and be held to a certain standard. So we did the Russian Easter Overture, and then we did the Mozart Symphonia Concertante with my violin teacher Sven Ronning and the violist, whose name is escaping me right now, John Scanlon, great violist. Because something I was taught early was that you cannot play anything if you cannot play Mozart. The notes are not the most difficult part of Mozart. It's the articulation and the concentration to follow the change in tempo. Not necessarily rubato, but the change in affect. That Mozart was very much about dichotomous affects. That it goes from silly to serious and back to silly again, or from energetic to stoic and then back to energetic. And the end of the concert was Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony. I mean, the Symphony of Fate. One might almost suggest that it would be better to do the Verdi, which overture am I thinking of?
La Forza del Destino.
La Forza del Destino. Yes. With Tchaikovsky 4. Make it just the concert of fate. But I don't think that's necessarily a great piece for an orchestra, because the strings don't get enough to do until the end, and then it's too hard.
But then you have the tuba and the brass and all that get a chance to play.
Who cares about the wind? I would do Egmont before I did La Forza del Destino, because you sort of need pedagogic benchmarks. If you haven't done Egmont, if you haven't done, well, even before Egmont, if you haven't done Don Giovanni, you can't do La Forza del Destino. It's not allowed. I think the same approach that my generation has to video games, we need to apply to orchestral repertoire. If you haven't beaten level 1, you can't go to level 2.
You could buy your way to get to level 2, though.
No, that's a new development video game. I'm not going back to like N64 days. Where if you haven't beaten the Ocarina of Time, you can't go on to Majora's Mask.
I don't know what you're talking about because I don't play video games. So. What else is new, Nathan?
Well, preparing for an upcoming audition for the graduate teaching assistantship at Central Washington.
And you're having some problems with the publisher. If you want to talk about
Oh, my goodness. So, this is actually, when I was talking earlier about orchestral excerpts, this is in the book of orchestral excerpts.
What is?
The Jennifer Higdon Blue Cathedral.
And for those of you who haven't, you should definitely check this out. But one thing you should definitely know for the audiences that don't know, as far as Jennifer Higdon, a couple of years ago, she might still be one of the top living composers that's performed by major symphony orchestras. She's
certainly her concerto for orchestra is
the
best known and the most difficult.
That's true.
Which thankfully I do not have to conduct.
Yeah.
But the Blue Cathedral. So perhaps part of my difficulty is the fact that I just didn't ask him early enough as a result of my own personal anxieties. But when I contacted Dr. Nicholas Kawili, who is a phenomenal conductor in every way, and a great person to study with, I asked him, so are we responsible to produce our own scores, or will you be sending us scans of excerpts? Because I anticipate we're probably only doing just excerpts. It doesn't make sense to buy a whole score if we're just doing excerpts for an audition. And he replies, this is where you can obtain a score. So I'm sitting at work and thinking to myself, how am I going to get... This is about... The audition is at the end of February. This is the beginning of January. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to be able to get it in time to really study it thoroughly and prepare
that's the point.
Prepare my gesture.
To challenge you as a conductor to step in last minute and conduct something you have never conducted before. That's the challenge.
Which I have done many times, conducting community orchestras. So I looked at all the information, and the only place to get it is directly from her website, which is operated by her partner, who previously was involved in publishing.
Okay.
And the website said, you can make a rush order and it's like $20 extra, and you can get like first class priority mail and it's like another $30, or you can get a study score for $35 and just pay. That's what you pay.
Okay.
And I looked it up. I looked at all the information. I looked at everything they had on the website about shipping information, and it said scores ship between 2 and 8 working days. Mm. So I paid for the score January 22nd, I think. And so I figured by the end of the month it'll be shipping. At least by Valentine's Day I'll have it, so that by the 22nd... So
instead of dinner plans with your wife, you could study the score.
Well, we all know who my true love is. I think that, I've listened to it enough times. I listen to the music I have to do for the audition daily. I am familiar enough with the music. When I have the score, it'll make sense, and I'll know what I need to do. And I've begun to get anxieties about, was it shipped at all? Because I never got confirmation email, order received. I have a PayPal receipt because that's the only form of payment that they accept through PayPal primarily. And I have PayPal receipt, so I emailed the email that they have on file for contact information. And I looked through the whole website, and from everything from A to Z, it's the one email address to contact. So there must be people manning this system and looking at this inbox. So I email them, I give them the PayPal transaction confirmation. Can you please confirm whether or not my order has been received, processed, sent, shipped, anything? And I also offer, if I need to place a rush order, I am willing to do so. Please advise.
Yeah.
And this was last Thursday. Today is Saturday. I've heard nothing.
So you're ready for your audition?
I am ready for my audition. If I receive the score in time. I even looked online to see if there was a college in the area that I could borrow the score from, or even, really, sort of break the rules and make a photocopy of a score that a university has on hand until I can get hands on my own personal copy, which is not exactly within the fair use rules, but that's what I'm willing to do to, get the job. But I looked, and the University of Washington does have a copy of the Blue Cathedral, but it's on interlibrary loan to another university until March 3rd. So somebody else who must be applying for this position got to it before me.
You never know. I wish you the best of luck and hope you get what you're going for. But I do have a couple more questions. How's the cigar, by the way?
Cigar's fantastic.
You know, one thing that I've noticed in sports is that, you know, there's a lot of black athletes that play basketball, baseball, football, but not a lot of black athletes in tennis, for example, not a lot of black athletes in ice hockey. And
my primary conducting teacher is an African-American man who, in my first lesson, described to me living in Detroit with his family and going to see the first recitation of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in Detroit. Many people don't know that he gave the same speech in Detroit before he went to Washington.
Nathan, my question is, why? I mean, and in entertainment, you see a lot of black musicians in popular culture.
Why not in music?
And why and jazz? But why not classical music? What's the problem? Why don't you see it in classical music? Why don't you see it in tennis and golf?
It's a combination. It's a lack of interest from the community, and it's also a consistent oppressive force from every other nationality.
That oppressive force, but another factor is the economic status of these people, because to play tennis you actually need a lot more finances than to play basketball.
Absolutely, yes.
To play classical music, you need a lot more finances than a natural voice, where you could be an entertainer in a pop.
I mean, even if you're a percussionist, I mean, to be able to afford, you know, good mallets.
Yeah.
I mean, because you, as a percussionist, you're lucky if you own your own instrument. I mean, maybe you have a 5-octave marimba at home and a snare drum, but, I mean, possibly not much else. I mean, who has their own set of timpani at home?
So what can we do as artists, as professional musicians, to diversify our field and welcome more people of color, as they say, or black musicians, African-American musicians?
It starts in the public schools. And I think perhaps one of the greatest solutions, or the most powerful solutions that exist, is to start younger.
Yeah.
I think in the field of general music, where basically at this point it's just sort of, I absolutely mean no offense to the general music teachers as a community, because they do so much to prepare those students for the ensemble setting. But I think we need to start earlier thinking about the ensemble setting. If there are children throughout history that started playing violin well at the age of 5, there's no reason why kindergartners cannot learn to read and interpret music. And it's certainly discipline is a problem in the public schools that I experience on a daily basis as a public school teacher. But there's no reason why we can't leave the scarves and dancing behind. And for example, Dalcroze Eurythmics, if you're familiar with that approach, yes. Teaching students to have good rhythm that can speed up and slow down and remain true, as opposed to just steady beat. Yeah. As an aversion to arrhythmia or eurythmia, depending on your pronunciation. There is no reason why we can't be training these students in the same way that Zoltán Kodály trained in Hungary. And the Kodály method is present in America, but it more resembles the sort of bastardization of the true Orff-Schulwerk system that Karl Orff started in Germany, that has really not been well maintained in America. And I know I'm upsetting a lot of people by saying that, but if you read his text verbatim, what he envisioned was, choirs of young children, as young as, 4 and 5, singing in harmony. And the most that I ever see at one of these conventions is like 1 part harmony, and it's mostly movement. Yeah. Children need to move. I'm not denying that in any way. You can watch TED Talk after TED Talk that talks about how you need to access the primordial parts of the brain, the old brain, before you can have access to frontal lobe abilities where you actually have cognition. And movement is an important piece of that, and Karl Orff speaks to that. But once we've done the movement, we need to move on to the music.
Yeah.
And if we aren't moving on to the music, we aren't serving our choir teachers, we aren't serving our orchestra teachers, we aren't serving our band teachers, because we're not preparing the primary students for an ensemble experience, which needs to be the focus of primary music.
You know, public schools, are I mean, you teach in a public school. Is it okay funded? Are the funds okay? Are the funds enough? Do you have enough quality instruments to teach with? How does it look like?
Yes and no. And it also depends from district to district. The first school district I taught in, which I will respectfully not name, did not put funding in their budget for secondary music. And I was eliminated as someone who was endorsed to teach both choir and orchestra by someone who was teaching general music who had room in their schedule to take the ensembles that I was teaching. And now that I'm in a school district that is better funded and has administrators which better value music, even there are still problems because they themselves as administrators do not share the perspective of the classroom teacher. And the nature of their position is so broad a scope and their time so limited that they don't quite understand our needs. Which potentially could be solved by splitting their position up into multiple people, but then the educators' unions come back at them and say, oh, well, administrators are getting paid too much and our teachers are getting paid so little. But realistically, how many administrators do we have? How many teachers do we have? Yeah. So if there were 4 people in charge of music, perhaps one person for each area of music, general music, orchestra, choir, band, in the whole district, and each of them gets paid maybe about the same as an elementary, junior high school principal. To me, that would be a fair exchange for paying one person 6 figures, well above 6 figures, to do the job of 5 people.
Are there teachers out there that get 6 figures?
Not teachers, but administrators, yes.
You know, I was talking to Robert Dick, who's an NYU flute professor, legendary flutist, very revolutionary in his approach to flute. He was talking about how when he was growing up, there were the music education system in the public schools, which was many years ago, was much better. You know, they had access to go to these symphonies.
I wouldn't say better. I would say different.
Different, and having access to symphonies and all this stuff. Do kids nowadays have access to symphonies and going out to these?
Well, then I think our local orchestras are doing their best to reach educators and public schools.
So what's the problem?
Administration.
Again, it comes down to
administration. They don't value what really matters. They don't see what benefits students the most. What they see is the bottom line. Because that's their job. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they wish... I certainly don't think that my music administrators want my program dead. That's not the truth. They want the very best for me. But they don't share the perspective that I do. For example, last year, I was going to take part in the Tacoma Youth Symphony offers a school orchestra festival for school orchestras at the middle and junior high level. And I participated in it when I was myself in junior high. And it was a valuable experience, and they usually put together a quartet of their top musicians from the high school, the top high school orchestra, and have them perform. And at the end of the day, you, along with the other participating orchestras in your group, play a couple of easy selected pieces together under one of the conductors of the Tacoma Youth Symphony organization. And at the last minute, they told me that my bus would no longer be available because they needed it for a track meet in the district. And so the day before, I was supposed to be sent to this festival, they told me I had no bus.
Wow.
And so I communicated with a person who was in charge of the festival, and I said, we may not be able to attend. I'm going to try and arrange individual transportation. And I put it together. I had 8 parents between all of them who were going to transport my 35 orchestra students in my top ensemble. I have multiple ensembles, but it was just my top ensemble I was taking. And then my administrator replied that was not going to be allowed because not all of those parents had been approved to transport students in the district.
Well, let me.
Let's zoom out. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So there are great music educators out there still, as there were maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. But what has changed in the administration for them to feel that way? Because apparently the administrators back, 30, 40 years ago had a better understanding of the importance of music, and now they don't. So what has changed with that? That's the question that I struggle with.
And I would struggle to say that it's funding. I honestly think it's the inflation of the cost to do different things. Yeah. In exchange, this is where I was going with the previous story, in exchange for not going on that trip, which was sad, and I had to explain to my students why that didn't happen, we were able to do something which I think was more valuable for them. We went and we did an exchange with the orchestra that I student taught with in Redmond, that year won for the state large ensemble competition in Washington. And so we played for them, and then they played for us. Because my whole goal was I wanted the students to ask these highly accomplished students, what did you do to get there? How do you play so well? And the obvious answer is, well, I took private lessons and I practice. And the money is there where I teach to take private lessons. But the children in this area, in this era, and the area I teach in, they want to do sports. They want to be good at math. They want to achieve in engineering. They want to take a second language while they're in junior high. And they want to do music. Well, that's 5 different things. Whereas before, children sort of committed to 1, maybe 2 things and did them to the best of their ability. Yeah. And now they do 5 things sort of okay.
Oh, man. This is
and
tough.
If they would just commit to music, unfortunately, I may not even have enough for 1 orchestra. So I have to take what I can get. But what I was able to do on that trip is after we had that exchange with the orchestra and everything I thought was going to happen, of course, happened, where they asked the question, how do you get so good? Private lessons, obviously. We were able to go and see Seattle Symphony perform a new work by a female composer that I forget the name of the piece, but it was a musical representation of a snowstorm, and it was absolutely exquisite. And the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with a Finnish violinist that I think when the Seattle Symphony did the Sibelius Festival, forget his name, he played the Sibelius Concerto. I
love the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, E minor.
Oh, right? It's so hard to play in tune. It's the most difficult concerto to play in tune. Because the instrument, the wood itself is usually turned to G, D, or A.
Oh, I see, okay.
And so when you get into E, you have the leading tone is in argument with the instrument itself at all times. Yeah. So anytime you enter the development or the dominant or any secondary dominant therein, you're in conflict with the instrument itself. The same way that, oh my goodness, the flute concerto, French guy. Why can't I think of his name? My mom, who was a flute teacher, taught it a million times. Ibert,
yeah.
Is very much in conflict with the intonation of the flute. Yeah. The Ibert concerto does not want to be in tune.
Yeah.
The Mendelssohn is the same way. And then after that, we saw the Thomas Dausgaard do the Nielsen Third Symphony, which was absolutely exquisite. I mean, and he, being a Dane himself, really knew how to channel the message that Nielsen was trying to send through that symphony.
You think that's important when you have the ethnic or national connection to
it's not necessary, but it is useful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure as an Armenian, you've heard plenty of saber dances that were absolutely disgusting. But not many people know that Alan Havanis was Armenian.
And actually, he spent the last
in the Northwest
years of his life here in Seattle, here in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, I love the story. I think you told me the story about how he composed, a full repertoire of music and then went to meet with Bernstein and Copeland and destroyed most of it.
Yeah.
And his musical style was forever changed after that.
Yeah. Some crazy stories out there. As you know, you talked about private lessons, and this is going back to a topic that we're talking about, the economic status. But is classical music affordable?
Yes and no.
So how can the people who don't have the finances still experience classical music, still learn classical music? Are there organizations out there? How do you access those organizations? How do we reach out?
When you think of wealthy countries, do you immediately think of Venezuela?
No.
What country in the world has the best music education program?
I would say Venezuela.
Venezuela. And it's because they invested in that as a form of education. That from the primary age...
State-sponsored, though. It is state-sponsored.
It's state-sponsored.
And with state-sponsored, you get a lot of problems, though. I mean,
yes.
Soviet Union was state-sponsored. That's why you got so many great musicians, but then you see a lot of the composers that we talked about suffered because of the state-sponsorship.
Well, many of those Soviet musicians were outshined by the Israeli musicians that came out at the time. They were mostly sponsored by American funds, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. But the point that I am making at is if we as a culture, as a society, whether it is state-sponsored or privately funded or community by community, and this is one of the many benefits of the political system that we have in America as a democratic republic. If Kentucky wants to continue being totally asinine and not giving services to the taxpayers and relying on northern states to pay for their lack of taxpayer income, whatever, let's move on.
Yeah.
But if Washington and Oregon and California and New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, want to have state-sponsored programs for youth in the arts, and that's not limited to music. Visual arts,
sure.
Drama, certainly, theater, or, how many students do I have that can't sit still during class period? I don't have enough fingers. And it is no insult to those students to say that school where you sit down at a desk is not the place for them. That is not an insult to them. It's an insult to the system that they're not providing them with an experience that is readying them for a post-secondary experience.
Yeah.
That is not providing them with an auto mechanics program. Mm-hmm. Or a setting where they work only with their hands. Do you think a contractor doesn't know anything about math? A good private contractor knows math.
Yeah.
Even to the basic statistics. A good contractor has to know. And the fact that that we expect children to sit in a chair at a desk in a room at a public school is ridiculous. I'm not supporting charter schools in any way. I'm saying that our public schools need to provide more options for a wider variety of learning styles, which we used to do in the past, but not exactly in the correct way. In the past, if a student wasn't well suited for school, they just left school.
Yeah.
But they had the option to go start studying with an electrician or a plumber or somebody and learn a trade and support their family.
Yeah.
And they were respected for being good at what they did.
Yeah. Man, so many different angles to all that's happening in the world, and it's tough. It comes down to I just wish that there were just more arts education in public schools and just at the very elementary level. I just wish there were, and I don't know. We're talking about all these things, and I don't know if we're coming up with any solutions, just thoughts. But hopefully the people who are in charge, the administrators, the lawmakers, the top politicians,
the answer is the conversation.
Yeah,
it's not one answer.
Yeah,
if there was one answer, we wouldn't have two political parties. The answer is in the conversation.
Well, let's get off topic a little bit.
Yes,
off topic from music,
please.
Olympics are happening. Are you an Olympic fan?
I grew up very much in love with the Olympics and the music involved therein. I remember when I was in school, the Torino Olympics in Italy. My mom is Italian.
Is that 2002?
Oh, don't make me regret how long ago that was.
Yeah.
I think you're right. The Torino Olympics, the opening ceremonies were almost entirely revolving around Italian classical music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a young girl came out, no older than 7 or 8, and sang the Italian national anthem, the Forza Italia. I forget the official name. And Verdi was playing left and right, and even in the Beijing Olympics, the Chinese music was featured. And the Olympics used to be not an exposition of athletic prowess, but also a communion of global culture.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think we have lost.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't watch just because of the difference in time zones and being an adult with a full-time job. I haven't been able to watch the opening ceremonies for the Winter Olympics yet. Although I do prefer the Winter Olympics to the Summer Olympics.
Well, we know your background. I mean, for those who don't know your background, what's your background?
Yeah, being Norwegian, the Winter Olympics excite me a little more than the Summer Olympics. I don't know, but for me, a man going head first down an icy tube on nothing but a skate is a little more interesting than someone running around a track on their feet or kicking a ball or throwing a ball into a hoop that we've all seen someone else do 1,000 times.
Yeah.
The Winter Olympics are almost like a mixed martial arts. It's high stakes decision making.
Yeah.
You're hurtling down a hill.
So speaking of mixed martial arts, I have a lot of friends who are musicians, and every time I say I love mixed martial arts, they say, "How can you love mixed martial arts?
How can you not?
What do you like about mixed martial arts? It's so violent." But the great thing is, when I talked to you about this and we talked about mixed martial arts, you had the perfect explanation for what it is and how you feel about it. And you being a musician and liking and loving mixed martial arts, just say what you said early on, off record, now on record.
2 words. Body awareness. You don't need to say much more than that. I'll explain further just for the purposes of the podcast. But in order to be a successful martial artist, whether it's MMA or Taekwondo or what's that terrible one where they're just kicking each other constantly? Where it's all shin kicks. The whole concept is, I hope you're consulting the Oracle to help me remember. The whole point is body...
Muay Thai?
Huh?
Muay Thai?
Muay Thai, yeah. Muay Thai. The whole point is body awareness. That as a
that took a while.
We got there. That as a musician, and more importantly as a conductor, that you must be absolutely in touch with what you do with your mind to make your body move, and the actual movement that is produced by that thought.
Yeah.
And so martial arts, in a way, are extremely similar, if not completely similar. That you are assessing a situation and making a decision about what movement to make next.
Yeah.
As a musician, I'm interpreting visual stimulus as the music, or as a conductor, the score, and deciding what gesture to make as a conductor to convey to the orchestra, or what shift to make with my hand and what articulation to make with my bow to produce exactly the effect I need to do to execute the movement that produces Well, sound. The difference is sound. Of course, there are lots of terrible sounds here, martial arts. But the connection is the body awareness, what I started with. And that's something that we have lost in the digital age. And it's not that kids need to participate in sports. In fact, I think competition is a negative thing for our culture. That if you're comparing yourself to someone else, you are inherently demeaning yourself.
Yeah.
Which is why I've always valued things like, most winter sports, where you're just trying to produce your own time or your own score, or
still in competition
with yourself. You're trying to
sort of. I mean, but
you're trying to produce the best result.
Yes.
You're not trying to beat him or her. You're trying to.
But if you want that medal, you're trying to get a better score. So
I disagree, because it's not competitive. It's
not literally competitive.
It's not literally competitive. It's analytical.
Yeah.
It's thinking about what could I be doing to produce a better result, which is something we do in the music world, especially in the practice room.
Yeah.
I subscribe highly to a system of practice techniques by this guy, Burton Kaplan. I think he taught either Indiana or Illinois, one or the other. He did a special training for concertmasters about how to practice and how to record your practice. And he has one specific technique that is the technique of halves, where you practice a specific passage of music with a combination of rhythms, of long and short tones. So like maybe if it's a passage of straight 16th notes, the first time you play so slowly that you can play it perfectly. And maybe that's like a quarter note equals 30. I mean, something...
Which is not even on your metronome.
Not even on the metronome. And then the next time you play that same tempo, but instead of 16th notes, you do dotted 8th note, 16th note, dotted 8th note, 16th note. And then 16th note, dotted 8th. And then 2 16ths, 2 dotted 8ths. 2 8ths, 2 16ths. 16th, 2 8ths, 16th. And any variation you can come upon. Because once you have combined all of those different variables, all those different combinations, you've played it at twice the tempo. And by employing that sort of strategy, you can practice beyond your limits.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the idea of competition. That I'm not competing with anybody else. It's what approach am I not taking that will improve my technique.
Yeah. It's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
And to bring this back to conducting as a realm, in Rainier Symphony, a local community orchestra that I play with, my stand partner was a longtime player in Seattle Symphony and is one of the kindest, most generous people I've ever met. And she would be very embarrassed to hear me mention her at all.
So don't say the name.
No, I won't. I won't. No, I wouldn't do that to her. But she, because especially while we were working together in Rainier Symphony, we were dealing with a lot of conductors that were very frustrating to work with.
Yeah. And
they would try and explain themselves ineffectively. And she said something that I thought silently to myself at each step of this way. She said, "Show me, don't tell me." And as a conductor, if you're not getting the sound you want, you're not showing the sound you want.
Yeah.
And so if you stop, even if you only take 10 seconds to explain, you're not going to get what you want if you're not showing it.
Yeah.
And so having that awareness, having that analytical mindset with yourself to think about, what am I not doing? And this reflects all the way back to me as a teenager in Tacoma Youth Symphony, where my teacher, Sven Ronning, taught me, if you hear something wrong, first assume it was you.
Yeah.
First assume it was you. There's a good chance that your stand partner was just playing a C flarp. And you were totally right. But assume it was you. And make a change for the better.
Yeah.
And so as a conductor, if they're not doing what you want, don't get mad at the group.
Yeah.
Don't explain music to them entirely. especially I had a recent experience with a community orchestra as a finalist. They had a very difficult time from time to time interpreting what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And they would ask me, this question or that question, and I would respond with, let me try it this way. Mm-hmm. And the solution was always me offering a different gesture.
Yeah.
Not me explaining it.
Yeah.
Not me assuming they had a misunderstanding of the music, but just showing them with my gesture, which relates back to martial arts. That are you really aware of what your body is doing?
Yeah.
I mean, every conductor, if you really want to feel terrible about yourself, look at the video of you conducting anything.
Yeah.
Even if you were told by everybody that was at the performance that it was a good performance and that you did well, you'll find within 30 seconds at least
30 things.
At least 30 things that you could have done, if not better, differently.
Mm-hmm. Bringing this all back because, I think, in all honesty, this is going to be the longest podcast I've ever done. I don't have podcasts that go over an hour, and, we're probably at an hour and a half at this point. But bringing this all back together, and I wish the back and forth was a little bit more so it could truly have been a dual podcast. But especially since you have a podcast, summarize what your podcast is about, what you're trying to achieve, what are the next steps, and what you plan on doing with it.
Yeah, so long-term goals for my podcast beyond my own personal desires is to get people more involved in music history.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this earlier about how do we better serve an audience as a conductor, and I think we can best serve an audience which is well educated.
Yeah.
An audience which understands the music is more receptive.
Yeah.
An audience who understands that Schumann was a pianist and a terrible orchestrator is willing to sit through a Schumann symphony.
Yeah.
No matter, and I understand that that's completely subjective in my opinion of Schumann symphonies.
And that's fine. And that's one thing I wish musicians were not afraid to say is because I get people on sometimes, and I've had many, many wonderful guests, many talented musicians, but it's okay to have an opinion. It's okay to state your opinion on record. You don't just have to talk about facts.
As long as you do so from a place of respect.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And you've done that so well. And I want musicians through my podcast to not be afraid to kind of talk about their opinions and what they see, even if it's not just facts and dates and all these things that are just the facts. I want opinions, and this is great.
So the point of my podcast is to discuss general music history at large, and not just composer at a time, but broad strokes. As I mentioned, one of the upcoming podcasts will be closeted composers. Talking about composers who were potentially homosexual or were persecuted for being homosexual, and certainly we'll talk about Benjamin Britten, one of the first, in the loosest of terms, out composers, and address the rest of music history from the same approach, and to really delve into the deeper parts to help the community at large.
And of course, you'll have an Armenian composer podcast as well.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
But I'll be the guest.
I'll have one for Alan Havanas alone, and then we'll do several for each of the rest of them. And that's why we need a music history podcast. How many Armenian composers could even the best of classical music musicians name?
Yeah, not many.
Khachaturian.
And the trumpet players could say Arakelyan.
The trumpet players would say Arakelyan, and maybe a couple people would say Alan Havanas.
That's true.
But it wasn't until you told me that I knew that Alan Havanas was
and it's a lot of his
Armenian
early works,
at all.
A lot of his early works had the titles that were Armenian, so he felt a very deep connection with Armenia. So, and he was half Armenian, half Scottish. His mom was Scottish.
Well, in any subject area, whether music or any other art medium, sports, for instance, we can't appreciate it if we don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of my podcast would be to bring everyone into the fold of the musical community. and to do so without judgment and without any place of superiority.
Yeah.
So many classical musicians think, "Oh, well, you don't know Mozart. You must not know anything, do you?"
Yeah.
Well, let's.
And that's one thing that I get frustrated with when I see musicians that talk that way, that feel that way, that.
Well, and they often disagree.
Yeah.
They don't understand each other.
Yeah.
And so, just to talk about music history from the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
In the way that is accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
And lowest common denominator, not in a way that is demeaning, but in a way that it's accessible.
Yeah.
And so in the future, people can look for drunk music history, and you'll find the podcast.
Nathan, thanks so much for joining me. We'll cut it here now, but hopefully we'll have you back on and talk more about your podcast and what you're doing. And I'll make sure to include links when I post this up. And, I'll make sure to update with the newest links when you officially get the podcast going and get this up on my site, because I love what you're doing. I love your personality, and I think you'll be a great host. Thanks so much for joining me. Hopefully this is just one of many, many, many that we'll do together on my podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.